Welcome back. So now we all have to struggle to stay awake after lunch, but we're all in this together. I believe in us. We can do it. All right. So the second critical area of education is, just want to spend a little bit of time talking about education related to offenders. And let's just use an exercise from Psalm 10. Did you know there's a whole psalm that's talking about someone who has the type of entitled, proud, arrogant mentality that you see with someone who exploits other people? So the Bible, there's a whole psalm about this. So we're just going to walk through it a couple verses at a time. And I just want you to take it in and just point out anything you notice. We'll just have a little conversation around this together. So the psalm starts out this way. Why, O Lord, do you stand far away? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? In arrogance, the wicked hotly pursue the poor. Let them be caught in the schemes that they have devised. For the wicked boasts of the desires of his soul, and the one greedy for gain curses and renounces the Lord. In the pride of his face, the wicked does not seek him. All his thoughts are, there is no God. All right, what stands out in just those first few verses? Yeah, arrogance. You'll see that as a theme. Arrogance, pride, boasting, that's mentioned again and again. Yeah, so there's a mention of poor as a category of vulnerable people, and an intentionality, which is what we, talked about, right? Good, let's go to the next slide. It goes on, his mouth is filled with cursing and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue are mischief and iniquity. He sits in ambush in the villages. In hiding places, he murders the innocent. His eyes stealthily watch for the helpless. He lurks in ambush like a lion in his thicket. He lurks that he may seize the poor. He seizes the poor when he draws him into his net. All right, what do you see there?
Everything's really intentional.
Yeah, everything's really intentional, right? Yeah, and the analogies that are, the metaphors being drawn upon really make that vivid, right? Yeah, he watches, and I think it's fair to say that there is an opportunistic nature of it, but there's also a planned aspect to some of this behavior. Absolutely. And deception, deceit is mentioned again, like we've been talking about. Abuse goes hand in hand with deception and manipulation. Again, that's just part of it. Almost every context where you see the Bible talk about oppression, right there it talks about deception as well. All right, let's keep going. The next slide, it says, the helpless are crushed, sink down and fall by his might. He says in his heart, God has forgotten, he has hidden his face. He will never see it. Arise, O Lord, O God, lift up your hand, forget not the afflicted. Why does the wicked renounce God and say in his heart, you will not call to account? But you do see, for you note mischief and vexation, that you may take it into your hands. To you the helpless commits himself. You have been the helper of the fatherless. What do you see there? Yeah. And maybe the offender saying, this will be hidden, but God, in the faith of the psalmist, is saying, ultimately, God will bring this to light. God will hold it accountable. Yeah, very good. And there's that statement, you will not call to account. But it's the faith of the psalmist that says, no, God will call to account. You have the fatherless. Orphans are mentioned here, so the poor. We're getting more than one of those categories of vulnerable people. And then the last slide, it ends this way. Break the arm of the wicked and evildoer. Call his wickedness to account till you find none. So the statement above of, you will not hold this accountable, the main prayer that it ends with is, no, break the arm of the wicked, and call his wickedness to account. So there's a call to accountability. And then more expressions of faith. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations perish from his land. O Lord, you hear the desire of the afflicted. You will strengthen their heart. You will incline your ear to do justice to the fatherless and the oppressed, so that man who is of the earth may strike terror no more. So you get that main kind of concluding prayer. Break the arm of the wicked. I think good interpretation sees that as a metaphor, right? Like there are various symbols of power and strength in the Bible, like horn, arm. We even use that one in modern vernacular, right? We talk about the long arm of the law, the ability to hold accountable, the ability to change something, make something happen. So it's basically the prayer is, the one who is saying, I am immune from accountability. I can do whatever I want. Out of pride, arrogance, exploit people. The prayer is, break their arm, meaning what? Take their power away. Hold them accountable so they can't keep hurting people. So that's the prayer. That's the just consequence of using power to oppress and abuse. And I view that as kind of the main prayer, and that's the main takeaway. The main point of the psalm, I would argue, is that those who abuse power need accountability. And we pray for accountability. But of course, the psalm shaping our spirituality is that we who have power work for accountability for those who hold power. When we do the safeguarding training, the goal is to go more in depth on certain tactics that abusers use. So we're not doing that work today of what is grooming, and let's be really thorough with understanding grooming tactics. That is to come because everyone needs to hear that. Another tactic we're going to teach on in that setting is to just talk about a set of tactics called DARVO. Has anyone ever heard of DARVO before? It's an acronym. It just stands for deny, attack, reverse the victim and the offender. Jennifer Fried, who I mentioned, who developed that language out of her research of institutional courage instead of institutional betrayal, she developed the term DARVO when she looked at corroborated cases of abuse of power in organizations. And she basically just said, what do abusive people do when someone calls their behavior into question or raises an allegation? And the summary of her findings is that they use DARVO. Now, you have all seen DARVO happening or experienced it yourself already. And it might have been in your family, or you've seen someone do it on the news, or somewhere else, you've seen it. It's so common. It's a way for an abusive person to try to deflect consequences and accountability and interrupt a process of accountability. I would never argue we shouldn't have, we're presuming people are guilty, or of course not. We have a thorough process. But DARVO is designed to interrupt that process. And it's often very effective because the person doing it has a lot of power. And so the good news is, when we talk about it, when we just give examples of it, it loses a lot of its power in a community, in a context. So that's why we do a little bit of training on it. Yeah.
Can you say what those are?
Yeah. DARVO stands for deny, attack, reverse the victim and the offender. So the abusive person denies that they did anything or minimizes it. Oh, that you're overblowing. They're overblowing what happened. I never did that. I never said that. Some form of denial or minimization. They misunderstood what I was doing, or they misunderstood the situation. Attack. Well, why didn't they come talk to me? Or why are they gossiping? There's some sort of attack. In a Christian setting, it's often using the Bible or spirituality to make the attack sound really plausible. And then the abusive person will pretend that they're the victim in the situation, not the perpetrator of harm. So, yeah. So again, more to come on that, but I just mentioned that here. And just to say, any kind of offending involves what experts call cognitive distortions. It just means twisting reality. And I just want to give you some examples of that so you understand that. I mean, we've been talking about manipulation and deception, but the more technical term is cognitive distortions. And that's how offending works. Offenders deploy cognitive distortions to justify what they're doing, to maintain secrecy, or deflect accountability. And so when we know someone is an offender and we are in charge of ministering to them, we can't really do effective ministry if we don't understand this dynamic. So look down at your scenario sheet. The fourth scenario is, I'm going to read it, and then we're going to talk about what distortions we see. So, and then we'll talk about what about ministry to a person like this. All right, so here's the situation. A registered sex offender meets with a pastor because he wants to attend the church. He shares, "Pastor, I know I made a mistake. I was at a party at my boss's house and this teenager was there, but she looked like she was 25. I had taken the wrong dose of my medication and I was kind of out of it. She started giving me a massage and it just kept going on, kept going from there. We didn't have intercourse. At the time, my wife had completely withdrawn from me and I was in a lonely place. I am just so glad I know Jesus has forgiven me." All right, just let's point out some of the distortions you see. Do you see any?
First of all, he made a mistake. He's not really accepting responsibility for his actions.
Okay.
Minimizing.
He said it was a mistake, which is a way of minimizing it. Yes, very good. Okay. The girl looked so much older, the medication. Yeah, he's putting blame elsewhere. Do you see that?
Justified that his wife was withdrawn from him.
Yeah.
And gave him the freedom.
He was so vulnerable. His wife had not been there for him. You know, he's putting blame on his wife anywhere, but where? On being accountable himself. Yeah. Good. What else?
He may have done something wrong, but I didn't do anything that wrong.
I did something wrong, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Like he said, well, it wasn't intercourse. Yeah. Well, you're a convicted sex offender. It was illegal. It's a big deal. And usually that's a tactic to try to, again, minimize it and say, you know, it wasn't that bad. Yeah.
The assumption was that she looked like she was 25, even though he's not coming straight out saying this. He's saying, well, if she was 25, it would have been a big deal.
Right.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah. Okay. By the way, does it matter what she looked like? It does not. She's a teenager. And this is a crime. Yeah. Doesn't matter.
Sounds like artist. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ron.
I was just going to say that the toughest one for me is, I'm so glad I know Jesus has forgiven me, because what that typically means is now everything's over.
Right.
Everything's done.
I see that. That's what I was going to say. I see that as manipulation, though. It's like he's manipulating the pastor. Well, Jesus has forgiven me.
Okay. How do you tell if it's manipulation and versus a genuine testimony of God is at work and God has forgiven me? That's tough, right? Because as Christians, do we believe in forgiveness? Amen. Yes, we do. That's at the heart of our faith. That's a good question. What do you think? I think it's a good argument that it is manipulation, because all of this seems to be designed to deflect accountability. And when you have statement after statement designed to deflect accountability, the religious statement about Jesus' forgiveness is right in line with those others. It seems to have the same purpose. Yeah, I agree. I think this is manipulation. There's no sign of remorse. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I will just tell you, teenagers don't start giving strange people massages. I will not say that has never happened in the history of the world, but I will tell you,
What kind of party is this?
in a statement like this, immediately I know that is just a bold lie. That's what it is. That's not what happened. He knows he can say that, and if he says forgiveness, Jesus, who's going to contradict him? He knows a lot of churches will want to believe a story of what? Redemption, forgiveness. That sounds amazing. But we have to be wise as serpents. And when you get statements so these are common examples. Churches reach out to us all the time and say, hey, we have an unknown offender. We know we have to be careful. Can you help us think through a reasonable process? And we'll say, okay, what has he told you? And they start telling us. Very often it's things like this. And people who study this systemically will tell you these are just common distortions. And there's other things we could point out here, like the passive language. Like, oh, it just kept happening. Like, what are you? No, you kept doing this. All of the language is phrased to try to deflect what? What you've said. Ownership, accountability, all of that. Yeah, so this is just distortion after distortion after distortion. Now here's what I want to say to you very clearly. When someone is actively deploying distortions, they are signaling to you loud and clear that they are a dangerous person. Why would I say that? Because safe people have done what? Safe people have done the work to be accountable for how they've hurt people. And very often when someone is caught and they can't fully deny it, the distortions continue, they just shift to minimizing it, attacking, like we said, Darvo tactics, or just distortions to excuse it or push blame off on someone else. But when you see these types of distortions, they are signaling to you loud and clear, they have not done the work to be safe, to own what they've done, and they're signaling loud and clear they're a danger. So let's shift now to the second question. What might responsible pastoral care look like given such distortions? Any thoughts on that?
First of all, if they're going to be allowed to teach, they need to be supervised at all times on the phone.
Okay.
A requirement in our place is they have to be involved in therapy both individually and group, and I think the group is a must.
Okay.
I think where they can be confronted, I think they have to be observed regularly, meetings with the staff or with somebody in the church, in order to determine progress, in order to determine if adjustments need to be made.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be a clear, I think there needs to be a clear presentation. If you violate our guidelines, you don't attend here. And then we need to be able to stick to that.
Yeah, those are all good things.
Can I throw in one more thing?
Please.
Men that are coming out of prison as offenders generally almost never will have accepted full responsibility for their behavior.
Yeah.
But they can.
Yeah.
A lot don't, but they can.
Yeah.
And so I do think expecting somebody to accept full behavior when they first come out
Okay.
is a little unrealistic, but I think if a decision is made, it's only a question of if, that they attend, the guidelines need to be a lot stricter and enforced
Yeah.
a lot more until consistent, long-term progress
Yeah.
is seen as observed as being made in what's taking place.
Okay. So just to summarize for the recording, you'll help me fill in what I miss. But there has to be supervision if they're here at a minimum, a plan for accountability with some guidelines that are specific. Some of those include not just supervision requirements, but that they be in individual and group counseling or treatment. And you said it's unrealistic, you believe, people coming out like of prison, for them to at first accept full responsibility, but that should be the goal that we're pushing them toward. So I agree with a lot of that. I would say your team and policy will be working on a process. We recommend a process where they're evaluated. And someone who's actively deploying distortions, we think we should be very cautious with their being in a setting with vulnerable kids or children, right? So we would take a careful stance on that. Now, it's your decision. You have to decide how you're going to approach that, not us. We have a training that focuses on that issue. At some point that might be appropriate. But in our view, we have to have an assessment of what's appropriate, because you have to look at each situation on its own. And any accountability, if we feel a person is a candidate to have some level of participation, in our view, we have to have a plan, like you said, that is specific, that has accountability and protections in place. In our view, though, it's critical that it's not just here, but it incorporates things like you said, requirements for other things they need to be doing. But I think the boundaries also need to apply to things that go beyond what's happening here as well. But that's a challenge because you can't fully monitor that, right? And so there's a lot more to be said there, but you're getting at, but let's just back up for a second and say, as Christians, do we believe in truth? Do we think that's important? So just on a very basic level in this conversation, I would say, a pastor who understands these are distortions can push back and say, well, actually, that really upsets me for you to say and focus on how old she looked or these other things. Don't you think you bear responsibility for this? And to just, again, not be rude, but be direct. I think it's important that we push back on distortions. And those who work in this field will tell you a lot of actual good, like group treatment or individual treatment, is simply focused upon getting someone to talk about their offenses without minimizing, denying, with taking responsibility. And that can take months, if not years, if it ever happens. So I just want to correct a couple of common errors churches make, which is, number one, assuming everyone comes to church. I can show you examples in the Bible where that is not true. Where Paul said, hey, this person, these people, you keep them away. They're bad news. Where Jesus said, when the wolf comes, you step in the way and you keep that person away from these vulnerable sheep. So there are so many examples. So I want churches to, first of all, just not have a naive view of course, church is for sinners. I agree. Church is for sinners. Amen. Jesus got a reputation for eating with sinners. Amen. But Jesus never said, put people in danger. And someone who is in active danger, bring them on in, it's fine. No. Jesus said, be wise as serpents. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if someone is going to be participating, we have to be very thoughtful about what we're requiring accountability-wise. The biggest danger is not here with tons of people around. It's when they're at a family's home or some other setting with much less accountability. It's not that this is not a concern, it is. But you see what I mean by that? So I just want to introduce that main idea and say your policy team's going to be thinking about that. We'll certainly come back to that in more detail. Yeah.
When you mentioned people who are actively distorting, I'm not sure the exact language.
Yeah,
They're
using
not
distortions.
Safe, using
yeah.
distortions, those are not safe people.
Yeah.
Were you referring specifically to people who are using distortions to avoid a kind of responsibility for their own sin? or people who are just kind of distorting reality in general, not just with their own behaviors, but people who are kind of, I
Yeah.
don't want to say delusional, but
I'm mainly talking
re-narrating
about
stories,
Yeah, yeah,
distorting,
Yeah, I'm mainly talking about someone who is distortions around their abusive behaviors.
Okay, thanks.
And yeah, I think we could go beyond that to things you're getting at too, but sometimes there's other issues and it's more complicated, right?
Yeah.
So,
One quick statement.
please.
Around the clock.
No, you're good.
I have observed two responses, two primary responses from churches when they work with offenders or when they interact with offenders. First is, a lot of churches say, come on in, brother, Jesus forgives, and you're welcome, come help us with
Yeah.
kids ministry. They put their church's safety, man, they
Yep.
push that out the window. The other thing that I have seen is they put their arm around you and say, brother, you're on the right track. Jesus is the answer. Just go find him somewhere else.
Yeah,
Those are the two extremes.
yeah,
And I'll offer my opinion. If a church does not have a policy in place, they are placing their congregation at risk.
yeah.
And I refuse to attend a church that doesn't have a policy in place.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. So there's two extremes, I'm going to repeat it for the recording, of assuming someone should be there, come on in, brother, Jesus forgives you, very little accountability though. Or, yes, you're on the right track, God calls you to accountability, but that's probably not going to be here, brother. See you later. Hope God be with you. So those are two extremes, I agree. And you're saying we don't want to err on either side, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. Bobby, let's go down just like 3 or 4 slides to the boundaries section. All right. So boundaries is the third critical area. And I'm going to go faster because we've been talking about boundaries a lot already. You'll have noticed. But clear expectations of conduct or boundaries are essential to prevention. What's critical is that we have clarity in our policy for, yes, the structured ministries, but I again would encourage you to think about, and your policy team will be thinking about this, are there 3 or 4 or 5 boundaries that we can have that apply to everyone at all times? And here's my example for this. Growing up in my suburban neighborhood, there was a neighborhood pool that we joined, and we did swim team and all that. Now, the board of the community of the pool was just parents or people in the community, right, who would get elected to the board, and they have bylaws. But as a 7-year-old, did I care about that? Did I read those bylaws? Of course not. I didn't care. It didn't matter. But what I and every other person at the pool knew were the 4 rules that were painted in large letters on the wall. And every one of us did know about those rules. Rules like what? Don't run. Those things, that mattered for everyone and the safety of everyone at the pool. So there are things that not everyone needs to know about in your policies or the details. I mean, it's good to be transparent about that if they want to know, wonderful. But there are a few critical areas, and having a few key boundaries, that really matters. And as I've said, it matters that there is a clear mechanism that they know, who do I talk to if those boundaries are being crossed or tested in some way, or if there's some other concern. Again, the critical approach is not to frame it as being scared or suspicious of everybody. That's not the framework. The framework is, again, positive and connected to our Christian faith. We as your leaders care that everyone here is respected and everyone here is safe. We care about that so much. God cares about that so much. This is how we as a community show basic respect. Touch should be welcomed. We don't take a child not our own to a more isolated area. So here's 5 examples. The slide, Bobby. 5 key boundaries. You don't have to use these, but these would be some I would consider for the whole community. that just, if you just say, look, here at our community, to show respect, touch should be welcome. Just please remember that. I don't know how many times in a training with a church, someone has said, there's a guy in our church who gives hugs and women don't want those hugs, or something like that, right? So it's not just kids who get unwelcome touch. And so setting just a basic boundary like that out of respect. And to me, Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. So it's the most natural thing in the world for me to say, it makes sense that out of respect, touch should be welcomed by the other person, just out of respect. We should love our neighbor as ourselves. Another one you might consider is that touch in a power differential should be accountable. So just being aware of that, visible, accountable.
Could you say a little more about that?
Yeah, so an example, and I'll probably use this in the training, so you'll get a preview of it. A pastor called me up before we did a training at their church, and he said, Mike, I'm concerned. And I said, why are you concerned? He said, well, after I give my sermon every week, I come down, I pray and bless the congregation and dismiss them. And kids have started running up to give me hugs. And he said, I'm concerned. This was before we came into training at their church. I said, well, why are you concerned about that? He said, well, you know. And I said, no, I don't know. Nothing about that concerns me. Number one, the children want to give their pastor a hug. Wonderful. Prevention doesn't mean don't touch kids, don't talk to kids. That's paranoia. That's not helpful. We want people to pay attention to kids. We want affection within healthy boundaries. So for the kids to want to give their pastor a hug, that's wonderful. Children need appropriate affection within boundaries to develop in a healthy way. So nothing about what you've described concerns me, because they want to give you a hug, and by the way, it's in front of everybody. It's very visible. So I said, look, if you were taking kids way far away to your office, I would be concerned about that. If you were giving kids hugs in the sanctuary after church, and the kids were like, what are you doing? Kids will show you with their body language sometimes that they don't want to hug, even if they can't verbalize it. And many church kids aren't going to verbalize and say to an adult, hey, adult, no, what do you think you're doing? Kids in church, most of them are going to be more compliant and respect authority. So we just need to develop a culture of, hey, if you're not sure, ask. Or you can do it non-verbally, like, I'll meet you halfway. Do you want to come the other halfway? And if they don't want to, that's fine. So I said, look, to the pastor, do you see those basics? Just give us a framework where we don't have to be worried, and you don't have to call me on the phone concerned. Like, you don't need to be concerned about that, because you're respecting this principle of that it should be welcomed and it should be accountable. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, you know my role, so it's kind of like I have a power differential with everyone.
Yeah, of course.
In our church.
Yeah.
And so a mentor of mine once told me never underestimate the power of an appropriate touch.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
So I've had to learn that I represent something even
Yeah.
if I don't feel like
Yeah.
I do.
Absolutely.
And so, it's just tricky for me sometimes. It's the obvious ones are obvious.
Yeah.
But like you see somebody crying in the congregation.
Absolutely.
And it's like, hey, can I give you a hug? But then I think about that power differential.
Yeah.
Like, well, are they going to tell me no if they really don't want? Is that a realistic expectation? And
Well,
so it makes sense. It's just a.
well, if you work on it, it is a realistic expectation, I think. If you, again, work on this type of culture, it does give people permission. And yeah, of course, and again, it's not always something we have to verbalize.
Yeah.
But sometimes it is appropriate to verbalize if you're not sure. Sometimes you can tell with just body language, nonverbal, yes, this is, But by the way, we don't need to freak out either. If someone says, hey, like, I really didn't feel like I did want that hug, no problem. Thank you for telling me. We'll be more careful in the future. It doesn't mean you're an abusive person if that happened. And then, so again, we need to have a sense of appropriate response. So again, there can be all sorts of reasons for, that type of explanation for that. But what we do know is bad actors will constantly try to push those boundaries further, and it'll often emerge as a pattern, not just a one-time, hey, yeah, I just didn't like that, or I know I gave you that hug. You know, again, so those are very different situations. Do you see what I mean? Okay. Yeah. We would encourage you to establish a team specifically that will document policy violations or concerns. The reason for that, again, is not because we're promoting paranoia and suspicion. It's just that you will not see the pattern when you could have seen it if you don't do this. Because if one of you sees a concern, let's just say it's an adult giving hugs to kids who don't want those hugs. If you see it one Sunday after church, and I see it 2 weeks later, and one of you sees it a month later, if that information doesn't get to one place, even if you deal with it correctly in the moment and remind the adult, hey, they said no, let's please respect that. And even if I deal with it correctly, and we're not dealing it within the system appropriately, you know, a person continuing to violate that is showing us something that's much more serious when that's a pattern of testing that kind of boundary. So documenting it, you know, securely and being thoughtful about that, it just helps us respond appropriately. Yeah.
I'm a seventh grade teacher.
Yep.
And I will say that that age group, that generation, they are being taught that and they know that.
Yeah.
And they know to say, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't wanna hug. And
Good.
a lot of them are more comfortable
Yep.
vocalizing that.
Yes. And that's all to the good. Yeah.
I've had times where, you know, I have to pull a kid aside and have a hard conversation, and then I'll say like, would you like a hug?
Yeah.
No, I'm okay. And, you know,
Perfect.
but
Yeah.
it's definitely a
Yeah.
maturity relationship.
Yeah.
And so I do think like you're saying, that culture,
Yeah.
like making sure people understand that, but especially this younger generation, they are running.
Some of them get it and are ready to speak up, and some of them are policing their own peers who are crossing boundaries. Yeah, and because I talk to my own kids about this, like sometimes they had friends who would confide in them. And then my kid would be like, yeah, I know that's not good. I'm going to go talk to somebody, or I'm going to talk to my mom or dad, and they're going to help you or help us, because that's not good. And many times teenagers will talk to their peers first before they talk to an adult. But then so many of the peers know, yeah, we can't just let this go. We're going to go get an adult to be on this, because this should not be happening. Yeah, very good. I gave this very training at a large church in another state a few years ago. And after they called me and said, Mike, here's what's going on. And I said, okay, what? They said, well, after your training, a few weeks later, one of our elders was talking to a parent, a mom in the church, and the elder just kind of mentioned in passing, we did this training, and we're going to do more training. And the mom said, oh, you're doing training on this, and you're working on your policy? Can I tell you what I saw at the middle school Christmas party when I was there as a chaperone? And the elder said, yeah. And the mom said, well, I was there as a chaperone because my kid's in the group. And I saw this male volunteer, probably in his 40s, walk by this middle school girl, reach out his hand and caress down her face in like a weird way. And it was written all over the girl's face. She did not like this one bit. And it just came off weird and creepy. And the mom said to the elder, so I watched that guy the rest of the night. He did it 2 more times to the same girl. But she didn't tell a soul until when? Until the elder said, oh yeah, we're working on our policy and we did this thing, just kind of in passing. And that was enough permission, empowerment for her to start to say, yeah, I was really uncomfortable with this, but I didn't know what to do with it. Well, then the elder got another pastor, went to the student leaders and said, have you seen any boundary crossing from this guy or concerning behavior? And then the pastor who calls me said, yeah, they have like 6 or 7 other general concerns about this guy. And I said, okay, what? Like, what are the general concerns? They used that word. And they listed them, and I said, well, okay, why did you call those general? Because you listed you weren't like, I kind of had a feeling about him. No, they said he did this, and then he did this, and then he did this. And it was all together super concerning. So I said, well, those aren't general, those are specific things. And it's not my job to tell you that someone shouldn't work with students in your church. That's your job. But I will tell you, I don't think you need 10 things to make a pattern to move a person back from serving with students. And we talked through that, and they eventually removed him, and he got really angry, which I said, well, that makes me more concerned that he felt entitled, that it was like his privilege or prerogative to work with students. That makes me even more concerned. I think that confirms, yeah, that's not good. Now, do I know that guy's an abuser? I do not. And I don't think it's helpful to speculate. What I do know is his behavior was concerning. We need to set a boundary or a further boundary, in this case, clearly appropriate to move him back from ministry. But you're not going to get, you need more information often. That's what's going to help you make those decisions. That's why having a team that's designated to document those things really, really matters. And then you just give people the empowerment to speak up. And you give them specifics. You say, like, hey, for example, if you're in the hallway and you saw this, or if you were in one of the restrooms and you saw this, that would be an example of when you would speak up. And, you tell them, you show them you're not going to overreact. You're not going to respond and accuse someone of being a pedophile because they touched someone on their cheek or something. But you are going to take it seriously, and you're going to reinforce the healthy, safe boundaries we've all agreed upon. Thoughts, questions about that approach with boundaries? Yes?
How do you keep that from turning into a culture of return? Everybody's always on the lookout for.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't think it turns, I've never seen that happen. I've never had us do a training and talk about this kind of approach, and then I've never followed up with the church and had them say, okay, people are just scared and talking about the smallest little things that aren't even a concern. Occasionally, we talk to a church and they share, they're being sensitive, and they share like, okay, this happened, and we're not sure what to make of this. And I'm like, honestly, I don't think that's very, I'm not concerned about that, to be honest. I've had that conversation before, but almost never. Because people still default towards, not wanting to get people they go to church with in trouble or speak up in an inappropriate way. I've just never seen that swing immediately to a culture of suspicion. Because some of the deep-seated things we hold on to are actually good. Like, we should be very careful about how we speak of others. Absolutely. As Christians, we believe in that. As Christians, we believe in the truth and speaking the truth. Most of people in our churches really hold that as a deep-seated belief and value. So to say, hey, there is an appropriate time to speak up, I've never seen that swing to abandon those core values. It just brings a little nuance, right? It's like teaching children to be respectful of authority, and we care about respect and obedience. But we also have to teach them there's a time where it's appropriate to say no and use your voice. And we have to do both. And by bringing in, and some of us weren't raised with that nuance, right? When we start to bring in that nuance, again, it doesn't usually swing to the extreme of don't listen to adults. No, disobedience is awesome. No, it doesn't swing to that. We have a center of gravity in our Christian faith. So we're just trying to bring some nuance and empowerment in a few critical areas. But it's a really good thought. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Anyone else? Let's do a 5-minute comfort break, and then we're going to finish at 1:30 on time. Let's do a 5-minute break, so you've got only 5 minutes.